Welcome back to Feminism Now, where we talk to leaders and activists on the front lines of the fight for constitutional equality, economic justice, and reproductive rights. I'm Christian F. Nunes, the National President of the National Organization for Women. For our theme this season of Women Leading Democracy, it might seem a bit strange to talk about childcare. Yes, childcare and family care is often a big issue for women. But what does it have to do with democracy? It has everything to do with democracy. So what do you think about this episode? Tell us. Send us an email at feminismnow@now.org. Now let's talk about kids. Social media loves to talk about children. Some posts say, think about the children, while others rejoice when kids do things we approve of and make comments like, the kids are our future. But what about the caregivers? Women, after all, are more likely to be caregivers, both for children and adult relatives. They make up half the workforce, and yet there is no national standard for paid family medical leave or sick leave. Women are also more likely to work in childcare professions, which are frequently underpaid. And if women cannot get access to care for their loved ones, if they cannot make a living wage providing for that care, then they cannot participate fully in the economy and in our democracy. Childcare is a feminist issue. That is why I'm so thrilled today to speak with Ann Hedgepath, Chief of Policy and Advocacy at Childcare Aware of America, a nonprofit organization dedicated to providing high-quality childcare for every family. Ann, thank you so much for being with us here today on Feminism Now.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited about this conversation and to get to dig in and talk about childcare.
You know, I will tell you, first of all, I'm really thrilled to have you on for this because a lot of times when we talk about feminism, we forget about this being such a feminist issue and such an important conversation to have. And especially as we talk about, we're in the fourth wave of feminism, I think it's important that we bring this back into the fold of the conversation. And as a mother myself of a soon-to-be 5-year-old, and as a single mother, right, leading a national nonprofit organization, this is a conversation that is so near and dear to me about childcare and what that looks like. And as I advocate and lead this organization, I know that this affects many of my staff and our organizers and our members alike. So thank you for coming on. I'm so excited to have this conversation, and I'm ready to get down to nitty-gritty about childcare. What about you?
Let's do it. I will say, you were just mentioning childcare is a feminist issue. I feel like give me an issue and I will find you a connection to childcare. I think it is so deeply connected to so many people's lives, their well-being, their economic security, and society as a whole. So let's dig in. I would love to talk about why that's true.
So let's just start off by talking a little bit more about the history of childcare in early education, because I think sometimes, the U.S. is not really clear about that history in our country. So can you tell us a little bit more about the history of childcare in early education and how that gets started and how that's evolved to where we are in 2024?
Absolutely. And I think I want to start by acknowledging that there has never been a time in our country's history where there have not been people, specifically women, providing labor to care for children. And the history of childcare in many ways originates with the labor provided by enslaved women early in our country's history caring for children. And it has evolved, and at many points in our country's history, there have been moments of necessity where there has been a clear call, a need for there to be childcare available, in particular at moments where women, or at least some women, have been entering the workforce. And the country answered that call at many points in our history, and then didn't answer that call in many other points in our history. And what I'm referring to are times like, as a part of the Industrial Revolution, seeing nurseries and daycares opening as women joined the workforce at that moment in time. The reality that during the New Deal, there were emergency nursery schools opened as people were reemployed on the projects that were a part of that initiative. Those emergency nursery schools transitioned in World War II to be childcare that was used by over 500,000 children. It was provided under the Lanham Act and supported working mothers who were helping the efforts and industry at that critical moment in our country's history. Head Start was launched in 1965. And then we saw, I think, a big roadblock or a challenge that I think we still haven't fully overcome. And that is in 1972, President Nixon vetoed what was a pretty big package from childcare to get us started on investing in child development and to make childcare more available to more families. I like to think about, or maybe it's depressing to think about, if we had started on that trajectory then and been resourcing childcare differently from then on, where we might be today. But as a result of that veto, we have ended up with a system right now where the federal and state governments put resources in to state agencies. Those state agencies contribute to subsidies and vouchers and other resources that go to a childcare system that exists. It's mixed delivery, it's in the private sector, and it's meeting some families' needs. But there are still challenges around access and affordability that we have to tackle. And I think there are a lot of good examples in our country's history, and there's a lot of reason to do that now. Yeah, and that I think is a crystal clear call for all of us as we think about what we push for and fight for, talk to policymakers about. I think childcare should be on that list.
So thank you for bringing it up, because I think it's really interesting to kind of talk about the fact that a lot of the funding has been pushed to the states, right? And when you look at that, we are also seeing that there's still a lot of access and affordability issues that are coming up for many families. I would like you to tell us why we're seeing so many affordability and accessibility issues with childcare when the states are getting funding.
You know, part of the dynamic here is that we have a childcare system right now where those resources can be deployed differently, state by state. And we know that the investment overall is insufficient to meet the need. Taken together, that means that families have really different experiences based on their zip code, and they also are having different experiences based on the specific needs they may have as a family. And what I mean by that is, if you need care during non-standard hours, you work a job that's overnight, we know that is a particular kind of childcare that's really hard to find. When we look at issues of affordability, the experience is really different from a dual income earner family to a single parent family. And even when you look across different demographics, a lot of families are having really different experiences. And there's certainly good reason to tailor some approaches to childcare to communities. We can make investments to meet specific needs. And this is actually where the types of employers can really come into play, or what does the community look like and what kind of care are parents looking for. But because we also allow for those differences to be around things like the amount of a subsidy payment and therefore the amount of a family's copay, around the eligibility that might exist for a family to access that support around childcare, and how much money is actually going to stabilizing or supporting the childcare system as a whole and its business model, which is kind of challenging. All of those differences, I think, really stack up. And there are great ways that we can try to standardize things across the country. And that happens when we get strong federal policies and updates to regulations, and when we see best practices emerge and states pick up on it. They learn from each other. But that can be slow. And I think that's real for families across the country right now who can't find a spot for their infant tomorrow when they need to go back to work, and when they need the support at home.
I want us to dig in here a little bit, because this is where I think a big problem comes up with our policies, right? Is that a lot of times we are creating these policies, and people will hear me talk about this all the time because I'm a social worker, right? At the same time. So you'll hear me talk about there is a disconnect in our policies, right? And the intention's good. Don't get me wrong. The intention is great. But when it gets down to it, we are totally forgetting about the people and the communities that we're serving.
I think that one of the things, as you're saying all of this, is also why is it so hard? I think about a lot of the things that are true about the way in which families engage with the supports that make a big difference. And they are things that we as society identify as a necessary part of helping parents go to work or helping support children and setting them up for success in kindergarten and life after, during formative years of child development. Why is it so hard to understand, to get the information you need to apply to access childcare subsidies or to find a spot? And there are these tools that are available. There are systems that are available to help, but we may not be leveraging them fully. So we have just seen a regulation, which I know sounds so wonky, come through, where you have the federal government saying to states, please put applications online. You've got to make them available in a digital format. And you have to think about language access needs. And I wish we didn't have to be saying that in 2024. I wish those were the ways in which we had already seen all state agencies take the lead and think about breaking down barriers to access these tools. We at Child Care of America work with these incredible agencies across the country. They're called Child Care Resource and Referral Agencies. And I wish that I could push an ad to every parent's phone so they knew they could call someone or find them online to find a childcare spot. But there's real barriers. There's really, I think we see a lot of churn and a lot of challenges that make it hard for families to get what they need.
Absolutely. And then I think about after COVID, right? When majority of the centers closed down and never reopened. And then we also think about rural communities and access to Wi-Fi. And you were talking about even putting it online, but how many families have high-speed Wi-Fi or could afford high-speed Wi-Fi in their homes where they can get on and be able to complete the applications at home? And then what times of the day? And I'm not excusing these things. I'm just saying, I think sometimes we're looking at how we're making these things accessible, and accessibility is more than just putting it online, but also creating it in ways that it's manageable for families to be able to do. So they're not having right after work of having to get off, pick up their kids, and then have to spend 20, 25, 30 minutes of time they don't have to actually complete an application when they're now having to tend to their home and give. So I think there's so many different parts to that, but I do think that's the first start. And I appreciate that. But like you said, why are we just not thinking about, in this country, right? Why are we just not thinking about the need for language accessibility? This should have been something we started back way. And so I want to bring this to the question I have, though, for you, is one of the things I think of when we're talking about finding childcare is that it goes beyond childcare. It also goes to leave, right? And paid family medical leave or sick leave or, even family medical leave insurance, right? Where even if those families needed that help, there isn't that help as well. So can you talk to us a little bit about what is going on and how does your organization also work?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, there is a thing that I think we all understand, but it's probably important to start by saying that the first days, weeks, months, and years of a child's life are so deeply important for them to thrive, to be healthy. We know now, brain research shows us that they are firing on all cylinders, learning more than they will ever learn at a pace that will blow your mind. And I think anyone who has kids has watched that happen and has a nephew or has a neighbor going through those early months and years of growth. And it takes a lot. It takes a lot for families to make those years successful for their children and for the children in their care. And part of making sure families and children are successful is making sure that they can do that caregiving. That is from moment one. And moment one is not your formal childcare system moment. Moment one is your time to bond and to be at home. And paid leave is critical to that. And right now, we have an approach to paid leave in most of the country where it's tied to your job, to your employer. And that means we have a lot of people without access to paid leave. And your paid leave is variable based on your employer's policies. And we have an incredible federal unpaid leave guarantee and so much room to grow on that. That's the Family and Medical Leave Act. And getting to a place where we recognize that the earliest months of a child's life are critical for bonding, for rest and recovery, for parents who've given birth, and we create space for that to happen that's not dependent on your zip code, that's a big deal and a necessary step. And then the idea would be that once you have been able to do that fully, you have a formal childcare system when and if you need to access it. And by access, that also means able to afford it, and that it's the care that you want, the high quality childcare that you want. And that's the dream, right? We bring that all together, and that then means that families are set up for success in the earliest years of their child's lives. And right now, that's just not the reality, I think, for a lot of families. We are seeing states move forward with paid leave approaches that do reach more people, that are the sort of insurance program approach where this isn't tied specifically to your employer. It's tied to an important policy decision and investment that the state is making in all families. And there's a lot to learn from that and hopefully move towards doing that on a national scale. And that's where something like the Family Act, which is a bill in Congress, can come into play, and all of the great conversations and negotiations that happen as federal policymakers think about what to do about this issue. It's critical for us to take this on. And I think it's really important to think about both paid leave and childcare as really important to families' lives. Now, keep in mind, childcare, as I think you are probably experiencing. You just shared that you have a child who's just 5, and you're probably experiencing that transition to maybe more of a all the time childcare to still looking eventually in school aged care for other times in the year, other times in the day. It doesn't go away when you magically go off to kindergarten. And so we need to make sure we think about the whole childcare system.
But I really want to go back because I really appreciate you naming the importance of recognizing the whole process of the wellness and the bonding and that need, of the whole family involving with the child. It's not just a child. It's that part for the whole family to have that need for bonding, that whole part for the family, the mother or the parent, to be able to get that wellness so that they could be the best and the most successful they can be at the very beginning. Because a lot of times we leave that out, right? We just think about the child or the infant, and we don't think about what the parents need in order to be successful, for that child to be successful, for that infant, for that baby to be successful. So I really appreciate you naming that, and because a lot of times we leave that out of the conversation. But it's the whole family, right? And we have to make sure we're acknowledging that whole family. And those policies and those acts are very important as well to making sure that we are creating a continuum of growth, continuum of success, and not just only looking at it in piecemeal. What have been some of the groups, or I don't know if you can name them directly, but what are some things even people who are listeners can do to help support, and advocate and help support this fight for universal childcare, for Family Medical Leave Act, for Paid Medical Leave Act? What are things people can do to really support that?
So the thing that I feel like I hear when we talk to decision makers about childcare is that there is broad agreement that it's a good thing. We hear a lot about how people love their childcare providers and educators, and they know that there are families in their congressional district, for example, who use childcare. What sometimes doesn't happen is those conversations, that acknowledgement that childcare is a good thing, doesn't move up the priority list. And what I need help on from everyone, anyone who wants to lend a story, a voice, a phone call, an email, is I want childcare and family leave and the things that make families successful. I want childcare to be the highest priority, the non-negotiable for policymakers. And I realize we all have a lot of non-negotiables, and we're very human in that we know we have a lot on our plates, and we need more support from our policymakers and our decision makers. I want childcare to make that list. I want it to be something where policymakers say, oh, but where's the childcare funding increase? Or what are we doing about childcare this year? And I think that there's a lot of opportunity for people, to your point, not just people who are in the thick of their childcare woes, but people who are connected through their workplaces and their communities and their families to a general need for childcare, where they see that children thrive when they have safe and high quality environments to be in, and their family members thrive when they know their children are safe. That story, I need more of that story. I think we can tell that over and over and over again. And I think that is going to really help us break through.
And this is great because and I really agree with you on this, because when we change our priorities, then it really helps us put the right focus, and it really helps us change like really our democracy, right? In a sense, because part of the season we're talking about women leading democracy, but also it's really truly about, to me, saving democracy, because when we shift our priorities, we shift the outcome of our future. And to me, childcare, right? Paid Family Medical Leave Act, housing, all these things, there should be priorities that should be mentioned. And childcare has to be a priority because they are our legacy, these children. And we mentioned a little bit earlier, we were talking about, what happened with COVID and the impact COVID had on it. But one of the things that came out of COVID that was good was the child tax credit. And what we saw, and I think this is a good selling point for individuals who are listening, is that when the Biden-Harris administration provided the child tax credit to families, that the statistics actually show that families actually used that child tax credit for their families. And it actually helped improve child poverty rates tremendously. And so when we talk about that, can you talk to us a little bit more about the approach in the advocacy efforts to continue the child tax credit, if there are any, because I think there are, from my understanding, an expansion of child tax credit, and how that can really help shift the paradigm for ending child poverty and helping also increase childcare?
Absolutely. So I'm going to make a plug for both the child tax credit, and I want to tell you a little bit about the child independent care tax credit, because it's sort of this 1-2 punch of how we did invest more in families as a part of our relief strategy coming out of COVID. And so the child tax credit expansion, which was a temporary move as a part of the American Rescue Plan Act, we saw 40 million families get that expanded child tax credit. And you're right, it moved so many out of poverty. And that's a big deal. That is the kind of shift that you don't see by tiptoeing around the margins of policy changes. And we know what to do now. And we should move forward with making those kinds of changes. And I know there are members of Congress who are trying to make that happen. And it seemed like we might have a window of opportunity, I think, earlier in this year in 2024. And it is hard to see a path forward right now, but that doesn't mean that without additional advocacy and sort of continued pressure from these lead policymakers, that we won't see the steam pick up again and the opportunity to move forward with some new expansion, which would be great. The other thing that happened during relief funding is we also expanded the child independent care tax credit. Now, that can really only be used for child care and dependent care expenses. But when you think about families being able to balance then needs like their children's food, the transportation or the housing costs they have through the CTC, and also devote some money to that family contribution part of their childcare expenses, you're really coupling up the full basket of tools that help with economic security. And we can pull on a lever to make childcare less expensive and to put more resources in. And we can pull on a lever to make sure that families get direct relief. And those things can make a really big difference together. And so moving forward, we will also next year have a chance to talk about this. Some tax credits expire. And we should be really clear that these are the kinds of tax policies that we want to see move forward.
Can you tell us a little bit more about how these tax credits could actually help childcare providers a little bit more? Because I think it's important because we also, at the very beginning, we talked about, the fact that childcare providers are also, essential workers, but they're also underpaid quite often. Oftentimes, they can't even afford childcare, right? So can we talk about how this can also help them?
Yeah, so it is so critical to keep in mind. I'm really glad you're helping me start at this point in the conversation that our educators in our childcare system, our early educators, are people with families, and they are paid a very low wage, about $11 an hour on average. And for many of them, that means that they are eligible for the same kinds of safety net programs and economic security support that the families they're serving are also accessing. That is really challenging. And when you do things like expand the CTC, invest in the Child Independent Care Tax Credit, improve and increase the resources going into the childcare system directly, that all can make a big difference, not only for the children who gain access to high quality childcare and their families, but also to educators who then are able to be more economically secure themselves.
So as we're coming to the end of this, I want to just pull this back into what we're facing, the 2024 presidential election. And as we're talking about the democracy, I want to end this with you just sharing with our listeners when we're thinking about the 2024 election and where we're at. And kind of when we think about right now the state of our democracy, bring us home and tell us why childcare is a democracy issue for us and why it is so critical that we keep this in mind as we go into this election season with who we are choosing to vote for.
Yes. And I will do my very brief disclaimer, which is I work for a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization. And I think it is so important to ask anyone who's running for office what they're going to do about childcare. And I hope people will do that because we started this conversation today saying that childcare is so deeply connected to so many things in our society. Our children and their futures, women in the workforce, our economy and our economic security as a whole, whether or not our communities thrive. That fabric, I think, is in many ways at the core of what makes up our democracy. And when you make the kind of investments that prioritize children and their families, and they can flourish, they have access to high quality childcare, I think that bodes well for our society and our democracy as a whole for the future. And I love to hear what candidates for office and public officials have to say about childcare, what they want to do. And I hope people will share those stories as they show up in town halls and participate in forums and ask people who are running for office why childcare is a priority for them.
Absolutely. And I would just remind that for us, we are also nonpartisan. So we focus on voting for the issue, right? And it's not about the candidate, but it's about the issues that they're representing. And if they're in alignment with our issues, then that's what it's really about. And so you want to make sure that whoever you are voting for is aligned with our issues. And if childcare is something you care about, and that's in alignment with the democracy that we want to see, then that's the person that you want to make sure that you are making sure that you're showing up for more than anything. And I know, and I think this in truth, I think when we talk about and we think about this, it's so important that we continue to support organizations that are looking out for our future, and are doing the work that your organization is doing. Thank you, Anne, for coming on to Feminism Now, and we enjoyed having you on our show.
Thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed the conversation.
Thank you, listeners, for being with us as we use season 2 of our podcast to showcase people making a real difference to women and their allies in democracy. Stay tuned for our next episodes as we cover the issues that affect women most: childcare and voting rights, reproductive justice and gun violence, the rise of Generation Z, and the need for healthcare for all, from affordable prescriptions to gender-affirming care. This podcast, Feminism Now, is a production of the National Organization for Women and Vox Topica. I'm Christian F. Nunez, NOW's national president. And if you like what you hear, please go to now.org, read up on our core issues and our approach to advancing women's equality. And get involved. We'd love to hear from you. Send your thoughts to feminismnow@now.org. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you soon.
Vox Topica.